Hi, this is Gavin Garcia, and I'm going to be arguing debate number 5 with the stance that the United States should not have dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, the dropping of these bombs killed more than 200,000 people, or about 200,000 people, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Uh, Most of these people were civilians, overwhelmingly. That's innocent children, elderly people, women, and men. It was morally unsound is going to be the basis of my argument. A large consensus of the people who support the dropping of the bombs argue that it was the least important way to end World War II, as they think that without it, there would likely have been a U.S. invasion of Japan, which would have costed a great number of lives on both the Japanese and American sides of the war. Likely even more than the bombs caused. So the first question we have to raise is, would this invasion actually have occurred? Um, and with that question comes another. How much did Truman know about possible Japanese capitulation? Well, nowadays we know that the Japanese had been attempting peace negotiations, indicated by the fact that the Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union was in Moscow, asking the Soviets to mediate surrender terms on Japan's behalf. As they didn't want, the only thing that Japan did not want was an surrender without, unconditional. That's the word. Unconditional surrender. Did Truman know that? Well, uh, there was a July 12th telegram intercepted from Shigenori, Togo, which Truman referred to as the telegram from the Jap emperor looking for peace. Well, there you go. Truman did know that the Japanese were looking for peace as early as July 12th, as early as the summer of 1945. So therefore, the idea that Truman did not know the Japanese were on the way to surrender is not viable, to say the least. Further, this makes the argument that Truman felt that there would be no other way to bring about the end of the war less viable as well. If Truman knew that the Japanese were on their way to surrender, why would the U.S. have need for an invasion or the dropping of the atomic bombs at all? The issue becomes especially glaring when you consider the fact that Truman knew of Soviet plans to enter the Pacific Front come the August of 1945, when the bombs were dropped. U.S. intelligence had been asserting to Truman for months that if the Soviets entered the war with Japan, the Japanese would be forced to capitulate. So Truman knew that Soviet entry was going to happen because Stalin had assured him so. Truman even wrote about it in his diary that he knew this, and he wrote something to his wife about thinking about how much less how many less American kids would be killed from from going into the military and fighting on behalf of the U.S. Maybe Truman just didn't trust U.S. intelligence, but that just doesn't seem very likely. But to say the least, from a military standpoint, from a surrender standpoint, and from the argument that there would have been an invasion of Japan, is just it's not very viable when you look at those facts. To move on to a more philosophical point, if that's the right word, might not be for this, but you'll get what I'm saying. So I've had this specific debate with friends and peers over like the past 4 years as I've been involved as a political science student. And a point that I've heard brought up a good amount of times in this debate is that The dropping of the bombs by the US truly showed the world the devastation that the atomic bomb can bring about when used in actual practice. So, from their viewpoint, the dropping of these bombs was necessary to prevent the same thing from happening ever in the future. In other words, sort of scaring world powers into never actually using the technology on a global scale. Like never actually using that technology again in the future, as they've gotten a taste of what it might look like on a global scale. Had multiple powers had access to these weaponry. And to that argument, I've always said, look, the tests that every nuclear enabled state actor performs in the development of these weapons is more than enough to demonstrate the catastrophic consequences of dropping these bombs. There's no reason to show those consequences in actual practice in order to prevent it from happening in the future. Also, there's no way for anyone to predict the future, so there's still a great possibility that this could still happen, despite the fact that the US has dropped the bombs. Especially with a lot of the people who were around at the time being gone. You know, there's no people who directly witnessed or were not. I mean, a lot of people didn't directly witness it, but they were around at the time that they were dropped. And you know, there's no. It becomes more likely as those generations disappear. So to say the least, no one can predict the future, and that argument just doesn't make any sense. Well, thank you for listening to my debate, and yeah, thank you.